Welcome to the Existential Empath Podcast. My name is Tanya, and I am an intuitive empath. My intention is to share valuable tips, tools, and techniques that I have learned so you can tap into your own inner healer naturally and intuitively. Welcome back, everyone. Today I have guest Heidi Fiedler. Heidi is an author, editor, and coach who has written and edited numerous books while balancing being a full-time mother. She teaches master classes and coaches writers on how to find joy in the creative process so they can turn their ideas into books and move forward with confidence. Welcome, Heidi. It's such a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So you and we're going to be talking about finding ease and joy in the creative writing process. And as you can see, for those of you watching YouTube, both of us are wearing orange, and this was not planned. I was definitely feeling, when I think of creativity, I think of the sacral chakra, I think of orange, I think of tangerine, all those vibrant colors. And so, many of us, including myself, are being guided to start sharing our teachings through writing. But many questions come up, like, how do I begin? How do I publish my book once I've finished it? Do I need an illustrator? Do I need an editor? Should I self-publish or traditional publish? Lots of questions, right? And so hopefully today we're going to tap into some of the answers to these questions so you can get started on your book. And so Heidi, you have written and edited numerous books, and you're also a poet and a painter. And so you live in the creative mind often. And I want to begin by talking about creativity, because that's often where we get stuck and we can't move forward. And if we feel stuck or blocked in some way creatively, it can be difficult for us to sit down and put pen to paper. I know those are areas where I've gotten a little bit blocked. So what advice can you offer for those who feel that creative block, and how can we move through that?
Yeah, I've definitely had those moments where I'm feeling like I don't know what to work on next, or I just can't bring myself to work on the thing I've decided to work on. And for me, a lot of times it means taking a break and like really stepping back and doing something else that feels fun or restful. Sometimes it's as simple as like taking a nap, and then I feel a lot more creative afterwards. Sometimes it's more like an extended break, really taking time away. But when I take those breaks, I feel myself like wanting to take notes or wanting to work on the project. And that's like a really great reminder, like, oh, I am committed to this and I want to be working on this. So I think there's an element of that. And then I think everyone can really benefit from like turning down the pressure. I think a lot of times the block is really that we are thinking of the next 1,000 steps that we need to take, and that is overwhelming.
I call that having Niagara Falls go through a straw. You're trying to really cram a lot of energy through this little tiny hole.
That's not fun. And it's much more fun if you can take the straw over to like a delicate little pond and be like, oh, that was fun, and like build on that feeling.
Absolutely. And, I think we've all been, whether it's we're writing a book or we're trying to do something for work, or we're teaching a class. I don't know what it is. We've all had that where we've been stuck. And I agree with you, taking a break. I love naps. I feel like for me, it's like, I listen to Abraham Hicks a lot, and she talks about when you're stuck, go take a nap. It literally resets your energy. So that's a really simple thing we can do. Or just go take a walk in nature, get some of that energy moving. I know for me, it's, if I'm feeling blocked, I'll just go on a little hike and come back, and it's like, oh, I've got some good juices flowing, and I'm going to take this opportunity to really, utilize this good flow of energy. And so, Heidi, how can creativity help us feel energized and fulfilled? Because when we're not creative, I know I am in a slump, and it's really fun when we're in that creative flow. So how does that make us feel when we get there?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think often we kind of get into the mindset of like, we forget that creativity is like a pleasurable, fun activity. And we start focusing on like, I need to get chapter 1 done, or like, I need to complete this draft or this sketch or whatever the project is. Like, we get very task oriented, and that's not energizing. Like, that is going to just feel like another thing on your list that is weighing
Like a
you down.
deadline, we put a deadline on ourselves. And I think
Yeah,
that for
yeah.
me,
And
that
it's
makes me
not
think of work.
necessary. I
Yeah.
think it is energizing when you have something, whatever it is, where you can really bring that playful, open, curious mindset to the thing. And it might not look like painting or writing or doing something that feels like traditionally creative. It might be like learning a new language, or like going
Organizing
on
your
a hike.
closet, that helps me sometimes.
Yeah, like there's so many things that are creative, but we don't call them creative. And those moments where we let ourselves like learn something as though we're beginners, and to really like make new connections, and all of that is actually creativity. And it's very energizing when you are in that flow.
It is. And so, Heidi, you're a busy mom. So, for those of you out there, I'm not a mother, but I still get stressed out and I still have a lot going on. What advice can you share for those who are trying to move into that creative flow state, but they have a whole lot going on in their external reality that is causing them significant stress sometimes?
Yeah, I am there. I'm deep in that with you.
How
Yes.
many children do you have?
I have one son, and he needs a lot of extra help. And there's also, yeah, there's just noise in life in general. We all have a lot of voices coming at us, a lot of needs, wants. Everyone has opinions and thoughts about how we should spend our time. Um, for me, some of it is like really like physically going someplace private and feeling like this is my space, this is my time to like focus, and I'm just gonna tune everything else out. And I think it's something that builds with experience as you get used to trusting yourself and like what you're interested in, and seeing that like trying something led somewhere. You start to notice like these little inklings and ideas sooner, and you start to take them seriously, and give yourself permission to see what happens. And that's all anyone is doing. I think a lot of us think there's some like code that someone else has figured out or whatever. No, everyone is just making up as they're going. And a lot of times we do lose that ability to tune in and hear the voice and like make something that we want to make. But we get back to it, you just fumble around and eventually you get there.
Yeah. And, one practice that's helped me that I learned in my remote viewing training, when I would sit down to remote view, you'd have all these thoughts of, I've got to pay this bill. I've got to go pick this up at the store. I've got to go do this. One thing that helped me was to have a piece of paper there where I could write down all of the things that are flooding my mind that don't necessarily need to be done right in this now moment, but there's something I'm going to be doing later on in the day or in the week, and just writing those down and putting them aside. It's like a put aside list, and saying, okay, conscious mind, I hear that, that inner voice is telling me I have to do a million things, but it's taking focus away from me being creative. And so that's been very helpful for me when I sit down, whether I do sit down to put this information together for a show or to sit down and write my book. All of us have those nagging thoughts that circle our mind. And if you can just, have a conversation with your conscious mind and say, okay, I hear you. I hear you're the organized one. You're making a list. I'm going to put that list on a piece of paper. I'm going to set it aside and say, this doesn't need to be taken care of right this instant. I'm going to put it over here. And then that kind of allows that energy to open up. So then you're like, okay, I've got all that taken care of. Deal with
That's
that
so
later.
smart. And I think even just coming at it from the mindset, like you are trying to get into that energy. A
Yes.
lot of times it feels like writing a book or some other project. It's so big. It's something we think is going to be this linear, like very methodical, use your mind all the time way. And yes, that's part of it. But like the initial dreamy stages, the real original work is happening way lower in like a much more intuitive, personal way. So you do need to be like finding your way in there, however you get there each time.
Yeah. And I know in my experience, when I sit down to write, it's not happening. It's when I'm taking a drive, like I'm like, oh, I'm just going to go take a drive through a national park, or I'm going to go do something else. That's when I notice, oh, I have all this juices flowing. I'm grabbing my phone and doing voice recordings on there. Okay, this is a good idea, or this or whatnot. So Heidi, if someone has an idea for a book, what is the best way for them to even begin the creative writing process? And is there something that we should be doing even before we sit down to start writing?
I am a big fan of writing by hand as much as possible and starting in a notebook. I've lately started all my books by hand, and that notebook is like a place to put everything, like a random word, a phrase, a list of an intention of like what I want the book to be, a note to myself. It might have a paragraph like that could go in the book. It's really loose, and giving yourself as much time as possible to be in that phase before you move into index cards and outlines and opening a document on your
Yeah,
computer.
exactly.
It's
I think for
huge
me, the
to
voice
spend that
recording,
time.
I talk faster than I can write. And I'm like, oh, this information's coming through. I just need to get it somewhere where then I can sit down and literally write it out.
Yeah. Yeah. Just whatever your format is, it's, I think, really helpful to think like you are creating something out of nothing. And the only way I know to do that is sort of like feeling out piece by piece. It just does not come for me in a fully completed form.
Mine doesn't either. I love Wayne Dyer. He passed, but he talked a lot about how he'd wake up in the middle of the night, and that's how he wrote all of his books. He just had these massive inspirational downloads, and not everybody has that. I have chunks of downloads. It's like, okay, I may have like a chapter of a download, and then I'm like, then I don't touch it for a year. I'm like, okay, but it's funny because I will keep that somewhere, and I'm like, I know that's meant to go somewhere, I just don't know where. And so, when you're in that creative process, I think we want to think from a linear perspective, right? We want it to be, oh, this is chapter 1, this is chapter 2, is chapter. That doesn't always work for me. How does that work for you, Heidi? I mean, when you're going through that process, because I know we all have different processes.
Yeah, I want to rush to that stage of being like, I know what chapter 1 is and I know what chapter 2 is, or I know the plot or whatever it is, but I don't think you can rush. And I think like one of the mistakes we make in general with writing is feeling like we we think we need so much time to do it. Like we think, oh, I can't possibly write until I have like a week in a cabin or whatever. And that's great. And maybe that would help. But really you can do a lot with like 10 minutes a day or an hour a week. But we do need like years to write sometimes. Like
Yeah,
just letting yourself evolve and mature, letting the ideas bubble up and come together, and like that you can't rush. It doesn't matter if you have a week in the woods, like you just can't force those ideas to become ready. And so I think there's a lot of tension and confusion and frustration around like feeling like, oh, I should just be able to write faster, or I need a better method or whatever. And it's just, it is a slow process when you are really making something no one has made before.
Yeah. And so you talk about that. You talk about just giving yourself 10 minutes a day. Can you share a little bit about that method that has helped you, specifically being a mother? You've got a lot on your plate. And so that might be a good tool for some people to utilize.
Yeah. And I mean, I count writing time as like you're saying, driving or hiking or wherever you get the ideas. Like, don't feel like you have to be behind the computer, but I think like 10 minutes a day, you actually get more done than you think you will. And especially if like when you finish each session, you have a sense of what you're going to work on in the next session. Or you have like a specific little tiny part of the book that you're going to work on, you can really like get something real accomplished during that time. And your mind is working in the background so much, and being able to like dip in and out, even if you miss a few days or whatever it is, it's like feeling like you're in touch with the project. Ideas keep coming to you. You start solving problems. It's when you feel like, I haven't touched this in 6 months, I'm scared to even look at it. Like that's a much more like, that's a harder hill to climb than if you just take little baby steps and start to like, when it's like small too, it just doesn't feel like every decision is like, I've got to get this done fast and I've got to make the right decision and everything. If you're taking baby steps, you can experiment a little more and like just see what happens the next day. And it's all just like building on itself for you.
Yeah, that's great advice. Because, when I started my book, it was about 5 years ago and I was in a completely different space. And then I kind of saved it on my computer. And then about a year ago, I was guided back to it again. When I read that, I could feel the energy of frustration and stress. And I'm like, wow, actually, for me, it was like, wow, look how much I've grown since that time. And I think once I do finish the book, the readers are going to sense that. They're going to feel that, where I started and to where I ended, and they're going to sense that. But like you said, some books will come really quickly and you're like, wow, that came really fast. And then other ones are these longer drawn out books, which is a reason. And I think for me, it was more like a personal reflection of my growth and where I've gone. And so Heidi, I have a little tripod cat. I have a three-legged cat, and I had the idea of writing a book about him and his little journeys. I've taken him, he's been to, gosh, 30 states, because I've driven with him all over the place. And I thought, Tales of the Traveling Tripod, I came up with this cute little idea, and I'm like, I can really get the words out, but I can't draw for squat. How do I find someone who can draw, who's an illustrator? You've done several picture books. Can you share some of your advice, wisdom, knowledge about people who want to write books, but they can't draw?
That's me too. I can't draw. And picture books are their own art form. Like there's just so much about them that's kind of unique. And like other books, you can really go the two different routes of self-publishing and traditional publishing. If you go down the traditional publishing route, you can be an author, and not an illustrator. You can submit to an agent and get signed with an agent, and then the agent will sell your book to editors, and the editors and the publisher will choose an illustrator for you, and they'll coordinate all the production and all of that for you. If you are going the self-publishing route, then you get the advantage of having more choice over who your illustrator is and getting to choose the style and all of that. But you also have more responsibility figuring out all those pieces. I've found illustrators on Instagram and on Etsy. I think for someone that's self-publishing, a lot of times it's helpful to look for someone who's kind of the beginning of their career and seems interested in books or illustration, that style. And then really approaching it as a collaboration. I think it's helpful. You are hiring someone to execute your vision, but you're also hiring a visual storyteller, someone who knows how to tell a story through pictures, and they're going to add so many layers and interesting details, and you just want to give them a little space to add their own special touch to the project.
Yeah. And so really tuning into your intuition on that, I think, and making sure that you vibe with that illustrator, and that, they're going to be, just as you're telling the story in words, they're going to be telling the story in a visual. And it's really good to be able to harmonize the two together. And I love that. Etsy, didn't think about Etsy. That's a great, or even Pinterest probably too. That's a great idea.
Yeah, you have to do a little homework, and usually, artists that are represented by agents are not going to be open to doing the self-published projects most of the time. Another way I've found illustrators for self-published projects is looking at the illustrators that are in children's magazines. Sometimes those are represented by agents, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes those are more of the beginning illustrators, and that can be a good way to get a sense of someone's style and just get some names that you can start researching and contacting.
Great idea. Great idea. And so, Heidi, you talk a little bit about the importance of how to read like a writer. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of writers are readers. I hope you are a reader if you're a writer. That's probably what's inspiring you. But I consider reading like a writer a really intentional process. And it's asking questions about how did the writer create this effect? Why is the book affecting me this way? Why is it giving me these thoughts and feelings? And for me, I work on a lot of picture books, so I might take like a stack of 10 picture books, read through them all pretty like closely, maybe over an hour or so, take notes, and then like if something seems like, oh, that was such a cool thing, or that was a cool moment, or I really love that character, I go back and like reread more closely and look at how did they actually do that? What words did they use? What pacing was like there across the different spreads? How does it work? Like you're trying to figure out what's inside the writing that is making you have that feeling, and then apply it to your own work. And sometimes you're applying it like directly if you are working on a project, but sometimes it's like years later, you're just kind of building this intuitive understanding of what a picture book is and how it works. And you have so much inspiration to draw on. It's a really great practice.
Yeah. And, being able to really feel, is it important to feel in, you write children's books. Is it important to feel into the child's energy as well to see how is a child going to perceive this and kind of soak this information in?
Yeah, a lot of times there are kind of like two levels to a book of like what the adult is reading and what the child is
Yes.
absorbing. And it's nice to think about those two things side by side.
I tell you what, I've gone back and read children's books and gotten more information out of it than I ever thought I would, because it's so simple. For a child, it's like we really break it down to that simplicity. And oftentimes as adults, we forget that. We make things so complicated. And so just going, back and reading some children's books, you're like, oh, that can in itself can give you some creative inspiration. And I know for me, it's like, wow, I just read that book for a 6-year-old and I got more inspiration out of that to start moving forward in a certain area in my life. And I couldn't believe that. So that's another way you can spark your creativity.
Yeah, they can be really meaningful and poetic. And there's been so much growth and so many amazing books in the last 20, 50 years. I'm always encouraging writers too to like really actually go look at what's selling right now, because we all have our favorites from childhood and those are like great touchstones, but it's also really nice to see all the different formats and different story structures and everything that's out there today that can inspire you.
Yeah, it's like, I'm a fan. I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna hide it. I'm a fan of the Twilight series. I enjoyed those books, and I look back at those books, and I read the books before I saw the movies, and the amount of emotion and feeling and visualization I had in my mind reading those books with the magic and the mystery and the love and the, all of that. I think too, when we are writing, pulling in the feelings and pulling in those emotions can really help create the visualization for the reader as well as the writer, and I think that's for me, when I look back at some of my favorite books, it's because I could feel it. I could feel it. I could visualize it. And then when they come out with a movie, it's not the same visualization I have in my mind, right? But the reality is when we read a book, we are creating almost our own imaginary reality of what we are perceiving, that the words are coming off of the page, right?
Yeah, it's really powerful. And one thing I personally as a writer have moved toward is feeling like I really want my books to reflect my values, and like I want to write into being the worlds that I want to see. We have a chance to imagine and show people what life could be like. And some of those books are really very inspiring to me. I think like both as a writer and just as a person who wants to live in those worlds.
Yeah. And I think that's where a book takes you, right? A book just takes you out of this reality that you're in. And, I think there's nothing better than sitting up next to a fireplace with a cozy cup of tea and just, really finding a good book. And so, Heidi, you talk a little bit about quieting the inner editor or even that inner critic. How do we do that? I know for me, it's like when I'm in that flow state, I can feel it flowing, but it's when I'm a little bit blocked or stuck is when that little inner critic seems to pop up. What is some advice that you can share for those out there who might be kind of self-sabotaging themselves a little bit when they're in that creative flow state, or they're not in the creative flow state.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are like telling ourselves no before anyone else can tell us no, you know, before an agent or editor or a reader can say, no, I don't want that. And that book will not be published. You know, like you have to believe in yourself enough to get to the next stage, because if you tell yourself no, that's like the surest way to just not publish anything. And I think for me personally, like on a practical level, working on paper really does help me. As soon as I get on my computer, I tend to be much more like, I'm gonna tinker with this word and I'm gonna like back and whatever. So I do always recommend paper as long as you can. And even when it's like you're in a Word document, like printing it out and writing your comments on that, reading it like as though it was a book as much as you can, I think is helpful. And also, like, I think for a lot of people, the inner editor comes up during the revision process. Like
Yes.
sometimes there's like a lot of excitement around the idea and getting it down, and that first draft feels like really energizing, and then you're just like, whoa, I cannot revise this. And I think partly that's overwhelm and feeling like, am I up to this? Like, how do I even do this? And some of it is feeling like the revision process is like its own thing where you're supposed to be much more like precise and choosing things correctly, and there's a right way and a wrong way. And I think if you can bring a little bit more of that creative energy from the initial draft and that like really exciting creation part of it to the revision stage, like I like to, like in the margins, brainstorm like, you know, 5 different ways this little moment might go, or like 5 ways this sentence might get revised, so that it just feels looser and not like I have to decide everything right now and I have to like make it perfect in one draft. Also just giving yourself permission to be like, this is one round of revisions. There's going to be more. Like, I don't have to figure it all out right this second.
Yeah, because I think that's the intimidating part. It's like, okay, I've got all my ideas, I've written my book, and then now I'm handing it to someone else and they're going to critique it and they're going to possibly change it. And that could be some of our inner child wounds. I mean, I know going back to school, when you put something to, it reminds me of the Christmas Story when Ralphie writes the letter to the teacher about his Red Ryder BB gun and how excited he is about it and he wants it. And he thinks he's going to get an A+++ on this paper. And I think he gets like a C-. I can't remember, but he's just devastated by that. And how many times did that happen to us as children, right? It's like we wrote something that we were so passionate about, and then it comes back with a big D+ on it and written in red. And I think too, that's for me, that's intimidating when you're like, oh, this was my passion project and now someone's kind of poo-pooing it a little bit. But when you look at the editing process, it's not really that. It's just there's a little bit of a structure to that, and there's a little bit of a flow to it. And I think as new writers, is there any advice you can share about that for people who might be not really caught up on writing the book, but actually more caught up on, when I submit this to an editor, my dreams are going to be shattered, because sometimes that can be really scary for people.
Yeah, I will say on editor's behalf, we are cheering for you. We don't want to bring out our red
That's what we needed to hear.
Yeah, no one's there to do that. And I think like one of the advantages is working with a freelance editor or independent editor is that like you have someone on your team that you can really like trade ideas with and collaborate. And usually you're most likely your editor is very experienced. And just like going to the doctor, it's like you feel like you're the first person who's ever had this symptom and you're embarrassed to tell it to your doctor, and you think they're going to be like, we don't know what to do with that, please like go. Editors have seen it all. Doctors have seen it all. Editors have seen it all. We've made a lot of books, and we've made a lot of books that started out not good, so we know how to move from not good to ready to publish, and we're there to help. And I think just knowing like no one writes a first draft that is just ready to go. This is part of the process. And it's part of believing in the book and taking your ideas seriously. And really, an editor's job is to see how a reader is going to experience the book. So they're trying to give you as much guidance in creating a really natural, easy, enjoyable reading experience for your reader. And that's something like you want to do.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that, because I think it's good to hear it from the editor's perspective, because from the writer's perspective, it can be a little scary. And in finding an editor that, just like an illustrator, someone that you vibe with, that you're like, okay, you see the bigger picture, you see where, I might not be able to get the correct words on paper, but you actually can see my vision. You can see where I want to go with this book. And I think that's important to kind of vet out your editor just a little bit, as you would with your illustrator as well. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, and there's all different kinds of editors. So I'm a developmental editor, which means I'm really focused on the big picture. I am focused on plot and character development and theme and structure. And there are copy editors that are really focused on like line by line. Does this flow? Is the comma in the right place? All of that. So you want to know where you are in the process. And if you work with a developmental editor and then move on to a copy editor, I think each of those people are going to bring their own perspective to it. And both those levels of editing have, warm, kind people. And a lot of editors are writers and have a lot of empathy for the writing process.
Yes. And that's really nice to know. That's, and maybe we visualize it based off of, I watch a lot of Hallmark movies, and the editor is just ripping their book apart, and then they're sad and, whatever. So, I think it's based off of our own reality too, and our own experience. And I think once you start writing more books, you'll have a better perspective on the editing process, the illustrating process, the writing process, the creative process. And, but, for those of us who are new to this, it's like I said, it's a little scary. It's a little intimidating at first, just like anything new, that we experience. And so, Heidi, you're a creative coach. So how do you assist others with their writing journeys?
I describe creative coaching, it's both like therapy kind of for writers. It's a chance to say like all the kind of personal things that you've been struggling with, the self-doubt, the worry, the decisions that you're trying to navigate. And it's also like on a practical level, a chance to talk about basically everything that's not in the manuscript. So like if you hire me for a manuscript critique, I'm going to give you the strengths and weaknesses of this particular book. But a lot of people hire me for coaching when like they're getting ready to start a new project and they don't know how to start, or they're starting like they're going to write in a new genre and they're wondering like, how do I change from this kind of writer to that kind of writer? Or sometimes it's more like, I've been getting this feedback for 20 years and I don't know what to do with it. Like, can you help me actually like process this feedback? Or
I've been writing paragraphs for 20 years and I think it's a book. What do I do with it?
Yeah, it's very personal and it's very customized. So it's like wherever you are in the writing process, your writing life, it's hopefully going to help you feel more confident and just like what your next steps are wherever you are on that journey.
Yeah, that's wonderful and very, very much needed in the world. Heidi, you're very much needed in the world. So
I find that the writers who hire coaches, they write really quickly. Like, and yes, they're like motivated and they're invested in the process and they're smart and they're good students and all of that. But it's like really powerful to have someone holding your hand, cheering you on, and then giving you really practical guidance and saying like, I think you need to do this. And here's the first decision you need to make. The people that have someone working with them like that, they're moving so much more quickly. And I think they feel really good about the process too.
Yeah, it's like a coach in a sport. You have someone, like you said, rooting you on. And just really kind of standing behind you. And I think that the word guidance in there is very important to hone in on, because especially when you're writing a book, you're like, oh, I could go this direction, I could go this direction, I could go there, and when you have someone to kind of throw ideas back and forth with, and they're like, well, from my perspective, this is where I think you should go. And you're like, okay, I was feeling that too. Let's have that validation to be able to move forward. That's powerful.
Yeah, I think I started doing it about 5 years ago, and at first it was kind of like people asking me questions that I was like, well, this is not a manuscript critique. I guess I should like call this something else. And then as I started doing it more often, I was like, this is really valuable. I can see why like people keep asking for this, and I really like doing it. It feels good to be someone's confidant kind of on a project, and to help them create their vision and turn it into something real.
Yeah, that's a win-win right there. You're providing a service that someone wants as well as enjoying it too. And many of us have a hard time finding that in our lives. And so, Heidi, can you share a little bit about some of the services you provide and some of your books that people can read?
Yeah, right now I'm working on a book about, you might not be surprised to hear, about making space for creativity and motherhood. I'm living it and writing it. And then I also offer master classes, which are really designed actually for busy moms. So if you have like 30 minutes during nap time, you can watch a video and do a workbook, and it's like really powerful and impactful, but short and contained. And then I offer coaching and manuscript critique. So I work one-on-one with writers and help them move forward.
That's wonderful. So where can people connect with you? Do you have a website or social
Yes.
media platforms?
Yes, I'm at helloheidifiedler.com and on Instagram at Heidi Fiedler. And I just started a Substack, which is called Mothers Who Make. And it's I'm treating it almost like a museum. Like it's a newsletter, but it's kind of like a museum. I'm interviewing 100 creative mothers, and I'm putting all the profiles up, and it's really been a cool project to see it come together.
Oh, that sounds fun. And I bet you're just being inspired by that. I think when you meet others who have, maybe not walked the path exactly, but walked a similar path, you're like, wow, okay, I can see how I handled that, and I see how you handled that. And, it's really fun to be able to connect with others who are of like journeys, I guess, so to speak, right?
Yeah, I'm loving it, and I feel really proud of it. Just I feel like it's something we need to see out in the world. When you see other people creating in that way, you feel like, oh, maybe I could do more of that too.
Yeah, and you mothers out there, you can create too. I think, the moral of this show is any of us, we're all born organic creators. This is what we're meant to do. And it's really just, number one, prioritizing it, allowing ourselves the time to do it, giving ourselves permission to do it, and then giving ourselves the permission to have fun while we're doing it. I think that's important. If it feels forced, then it's probably going to be blocked and not be as exciting. But if it feels fun to you and it feels inspirational, then go with it. Utilize that energy in the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And no, you are not alone. All of us are kind of struggling and finding our way through that process too.
Like I said, I'm not a mother, but what's my excuse? I got a lot of things going on. I'm a mom to this podcast. I'm a mom to, so it's funny because, each and every one of us has our own set of priorities that we set throughout the day. And for all of you out there, like Heidi mentioned, just prioritize 10 minutes. That's all it really takes, is just give yourself permission to prioritize 10 minutes. You should be prioritizing 10 minutes for yourselves to begin with, that alone time. And then if you are, working on a book or a creative project, give yourself 10 minutes. You might realize it might end up being 20 or 30 minutes, but that's okay, because you've actually given yourself the space and the energy to allow yourself to be in that creative flow state. And so, Heidi, as we're wrapping up the show, is there anything else that you think we need to touch on that maybe we haven't talked about yet?
Well, just hearing you say that, it just made me think, I think so much of it is just taking your own ideas seriously and taking that feeling that you want to create seriously, and not just like pushing it to the side and saying, oh, later, or no, that's not for me, or whatever reason you have. We could all shut it down. There's
Yeah,
a
we
million
can shut
reasons to
anything
shut it
down.
down.
Yeah.
But if you can let yourself believe, like, I am a writer or I am a creative person and I like doing creative things and I make space for that, it can be really transformational.
You're right. And so, Heidi, I really appreciate all of the energy that you're putting out into the world. And thank you for sharing your message specifically with, well, with all of us, but with moms, out there who are trying to balance their own personal lives as well as the lives of their families. And so thank you so much for all that you do. And I really appreciate you coming on the show today.
Oh, thank you so much. It was great talking with you.
You deserve to navigate your life in alignment with health, happiness, and abundance. To learn more about the services that I provide, including Beyond Quantum Healing Hypnosis, EFT tapping, and the Emotion Code, visit my website at www.theexistentialempath.com.